It started with a book. Not a rare one. Not even a first edition. Just a drab, beige-covered reprint of Middlemarch with a cracked spine, purchased by a dead woman 20 minutes before someone introduced her skull to a brass fireplace poker. That morning, I was halfway through a corned beef sandwich and the Evening Post crossword when the phone rang. I let it ring 3 times because it was my sandwich and not the telephone that had earned my affection. Wolf, naturally, was upstairs in the plant rooms with Theodore and the orchids, which meant anything with a dial tone fell to me. Goodwin here. The voice on the other end was clipped and British, a rare species around our Manhattan brownstone. This is Miss Agatha Larch. I run the Bookmark on 87th. There's been an incident. That, in Wolf's world, is how cases tend to begin. Not with a scream or siren, but a delicate female voice saying incident like she'd just misplaced a teacup. My instincts flared, but so did my curiosity. Miss Larch, just so I'm clear, you're calling a private detective agency because of a bookshop incident? There was a pause long enough to flip a page. Then, in a lower tone, a woman was found dead in the reading corner. Her name was Martha Bromley. I believe she was murdered. That made me sit up straighter. And what makes you think that, Miss Larch? Customers keeling over isn't exactly an emergency unless it's during a fire sale. I saw the bookmark, she said softly. The lace one. It was wrong. I didn't know what that meant, and she didn't explain. But she gave an address and said she'd be expecting us. By the time I hung up, Wolf had come down from the orchids, muttering under his breath about a scale infestation and the criminal neglect of calceolarias. I gave him the news while he poured himself a glass of beer, eyes narrowing at every syllable. She runs a bookshop? Wolf asked, already scowling. Yes. And wishes to employ us because a woman collapsed next to a copy of George Eliot? No, because of a lace bookmark. He closed his eyes. Fui. Which, if you're unfamiliar, is Wolf's polite way of telling the universe to go soak its head. Still, by the time I'd put on my coat and holstered my notepad, he hadn't outright forbidden me from going. So I took that as permission. Wolf might hate to leave the house, but he was addicted to puzzles like a fish to water, and I had a hunch this bookmark was going to make waves. I arrived at the Bookmark 25 minutes later. A slim little storefront, wedged between a Greek cafe and a dry cleaner. Inside, it smelled of leather, dust, and intellectual superiority. The body had already been removed, but the tape on the floor showed where Miss Bromley had landed. Her table still had her teacup on it, and beside it, a dainty, crumpled bookmark made of ivory lace, its edges stiff with something that wasn't tea. Miss Larch stood nearby, adjusting her spectacles with fingers that trembled more from discipline than fear. She had white hair wound in a tight bun, wore a cardigan the color of dull pearls, and looked like she could outstare the queen. You're Wolf's man, she said, with about as much excitement as a librarian finding gum on a book's spine. That's right, I nodded. Archie Goodwin. I handle the footwork, the charm, and the door kicking. Wolf handles the furniture. She didn't smile. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was the lace bookmark, meticulously wrapped in wax paper. I didn't show this to the police, she said. They missed it entirely. But I know my shop, and I know my regulars. Miss Bromley wouldn't have touched this. She hated lace. I raised an eyebrow. People feel that strongly about bookmarks? She did. Claimed it reminded her of her dead sister. But that's not the point. Look closer. I did. Along the edge of the lace, faint but visible, were the faded letters, Ile. Miss Larch whispered, that's not her name. So, I murmured, someone planted it? I think someone killed her, she said. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the snow had started. Not the pretty kind with postcard flakes, but the wet slush that aims directly for your socks. I wiped my feet like a gentleman and hung my coat in the front hall. The smell drifting from the kitchen told me Fritz was experimenting again, probably with something that involved duck, cognac, and a name Wolf wouldn't try to pronounce. I found Wolf in his chair, large and still, a book open in his lap. He wasn't reading it, just letting it rest there like a prop to discourage conversation. It didn't work. She was right, I said, taking the red armchair. There was something odd. The woman, Martha Bromley, hated lace. And yet there it was, a lace bookmark planted right next to her cold body, with the name Elia stitched in. Pfui, Wolf muttered, not looking up. A superstition, a quirk, a coincidence. You're allergic to coincidences. I am allergic, Wolf said, to being drawn into banal melodrama disguised as intrigue. Lace and sentimentality make a poor motive. I let him stew in silence for a moment, then dropped the second course. The police arrested the clerk. That got a grunt. His name's Tommy Brisk. Young, nervous. He apparently served Miss Bromley her tea that afternoon. They think he slipped something into the cup. And did he? Not according to Miss Larch. She says the boy can barely make change without trembling. She would say that sentimental women, especially of a literary persuasion, are unfit judges of character. I crossed my legs and studied him. He wasn't as uninterested as he pretended to be. His brow was furrowed, and his right index finger tapped lightly on the book's spine, Wolf's version of a drumroll. I told Miss Larch we might take the case. I did. Along the edge of the lace, faint but visible, were the faded letters, Ele. Miss Larch whispered, "That's not her name." So, I murmured, someone planted it? I think someone killed her, she said. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the snow had started. Not the pretty kind with postcard flakes, but the wet slush that aims directly for your socks. I wiped my feet like a gentleman and hung my coat in the front hall. The smell drifting from the kitchen told me Fritz was experimenting again, probably with something that involved duck, cognac, and a name Wolf wouldn't try to pronounce. I found Wolf in his chair, large and still, a book open in his lap. He wasn't reading it, just letting it rest there like a prop to discourage conversation. It didn't work. She was right, I said, taking the red armchair. There was something odd. The woman, Martha Bromley, hated lace. And yet there it was, a lace bookmark planted right next to her cold body, with the name Elia stitched in. Pfui, Wolf muttered, not looking up. A superstition, a quirk, a coincidence. You're allergic to coincidences. I am allergic, Wolf said, to being drawn into banal melodrama disguised as intrigue. Lace and sentimentality make a poor motive. I let him stew in silence for a moment, then dropped the second course. The police arrested the clerk. That got a grunt. His name's Tommy Brisk. Young, nervous. He apparently served Miss Bromley her tea that afternoon. They think he slipped something into the cup. And did he? Not according to Miss Larch. She says the boy can barely make change without trembling. She would say that sentimental women, especially of a literary persuasion, are unfit judges of character. I crossed my legs and studied him. He wasn't as uninterested as he pretended to be. His brow was furrowed, and his right index finger tapped lightly on the book's spine, Wolf's version of a drumroll. I told Miss Larch we might take the case. His head lifted a few degrees. Might? We've got a visitor. I tilted my head toward the front hall just as the doorbell rang, and Fritz's voice floated in from the corridor, announcing, "Mr. Gregory Ames." Wolf raised an eyebrow. "I don't know a Gregory Ames." "You will," I said. "He's rich, wears spats, and looks like he just swallowed a lemon. Also, he's Miss Bromley's cousin. He's got something to say." Wolf closed the book. "Show him in." I did. Gregory Ames entered like a man trying not to inhale the lower classes. Mid-40s, lean, and polished like a museum exhibit. His overcoat was camel hair, and his voice had the sharpness of an unpaid bill. "Mr. Wolf," he said, ignoring me completely, "I've come about my cousin's death." "You are most welcome," Wolf said, motioning to the yellow chair, at least 3 inches shorter than his own. "Please. Sit." This is Mr. Goodwin. He manages movement and memory. Ames sat stiffly, as if furniture offended him. I understand you visited my cousin's bookshop today. I did, Wolf said. By proxy. What is your concern? I'd like you to look into her death. Quietly. And the police? They've already arrested someone, Ames replied. A young fool. I've spoken to the inspector in charge. He's efficient, but wrong. I'm convinced Martha was targeted. Because? My cousin came into a substantial inheritance last year, Ames said. She was eccentric, but not stupid. She recently hinted at changing her will. Ah, Wolf said. He didn't smile, but the tips of his mustache twitched. You suspect someone preempted her intentions. I suspect, Ames said slowly, that someone found out what she was planning and decided to stop her. I leaned forward. Did she say who the new beneficiary might be? She wouldn't say. Only that it would anger someone in the family. Wolf grunted. And you presume it isn't you? Ames didn't blink. If it were, she wouldn't be dead. Wolf studied him a moment longer, then turned to me. Archie, tomorrow, revisit the shop. Speak again with Miss Larch. Also find out everything you can about the late Miss Bromley, her habits, acquaintances, and last known contacts. On it. Good. We shall entertain Mr. Ames' request. I suspect, regrettably, it may cost us orchids. Ames stood. You'll take the case? Wolf gave a single nod. I'll consider it accepted once you remit a check for $10,000. Ames didn't flinch. He opened his wallet, extracted a personal draft already prepared, and handed it over. Done. Wolf took it with the solemnity of a priest receiving confession. As the front door shut behind Ames, I whistled. That was fast. Most people haggle. He didn't want a bargain, Wolf said, staring at the check. He wanted the matter buried. I wonder why. I turned to go. And Archie, Wolf said, as I reached for my coat. Yes. Do not forget the lace bookmark. Take it with you. And have it examined. He paused. Someone stitched a lie into its fabric. By 10 the next morning, I was back at the Bookmark, armed with a notebook, a questionably good cup of Fritz's coffee in a thermos, and the lace bookmark in a sealed envelope that Wolf had instructed me not to wrinkle under pain of dismissal. He said it with the kind of tone that made you think he might actually follow through. The shop hadn't changed overnight, still smelled like paperbacks and Protestant restraint. Miss Larch stood behind the front counter, wrapped in another pearl-colored cardigan, flipping through a book like it had personally offended her. She looked up as I entered. Mr. Goodwin, you've returned. Like a bad sequel, I said. Wolf's accepted the case. Her face didn't show relief, exactly, just a decrease in tautness, like a piano string tuning down. And Mr. Wolf will come here? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Dead, then tucked it under the counter. Did you know Miss Bromley well? I asked. As a customer. She came twice a week, always around noon. Always alone. Always tea. Always Middlemarch or Bronte, like she had unfinished business with the 19th century. Any enemies? She blinked. It's a bookshop. You'd be amazed, I said. Paper and pettiness go hand in hand. Did she ever argue with anyone? Miss Larch hesitated, her fingers twitching slightly at the edge of a receipt pad. A week ago, Tuesday, there was a woman. Not a regular. They sat near the window. Low voices. Very tense. Did you catch a name? I didn't need to. When she left, Miss Bromley whispered, Elia. That earned a pause from me. You're sure? Quite. She said it like it hurt. Bingo. I jotted it down. Did this Elia come back? Not since. I made my rounds through the shop. There were 2 staff on duty, both barely old enough to remember VHS tapes. First was the cashier, a pink-haired girl named Ray who chewed gum like it owed her money. I was working that day, she said. I didn't see anything weird. You were behind the counter? Yup. Customer keels over dead in the corner, and that's not weird. I mean, she just slumped. Looked like a faint. We didn't think she was dead until Larch called 911. Fair point. Anyone touch her tea? She shrugged. Tommy served it. Same as always. White tea, no sugar. Tommy was in the stockroom, stacking boxes of remainders and trying not to look like a wrongfully accused man. He was thin, pale, and had the haunted look of someone who hadn't slept since Tuesday. I didn't do anything, he said before I even asked. Noted, I said. But that's not really how this works. I gave her the tea like normal. Just 2 minutes before. Then I heard Miss Larch yell. Anyone else near her table before that? He shook his head. Just her. Unless someone switched something earlier. That pinged something. I made a note to check that timeline. If the tea wasn't poisoned during the serving, it could have been done before, while she was browsing. Did she say anything odd? Look upset. Tommy frowned. She kept fiddling with the bookmark, tucking it back into her book. Over and over. It was like she didn't want to look at it, but couldn't ignore it. And you didn't mention that to the cops? They were more interested in where I was standing. Fair enough. I left the shop with 3 things: a name, Elia, a pattern, tea and lace, and the creeping suspicion that someone had orchestrated this like a stage play, with props, rehearsed lines, and a final exit. Before heading back to Wolf, I made one more stop, the Levington Pharmacy, a block down from the Bookmark. A quiet little place with old wooden counters and the smell of eucalyptus and guilt. I showed the pharmacist a photo of Martha Bromley that Miss Larch had lent me from the shop's memorial board. Sure, I know her, he said. White tea every Tuesday. And she picked up diazepam here once or twice. Prescription. He nodded. Low dosage. Probably anxiety. That gave me pause. Wolf wouldn't like it. It added variables. If she had mild sedatives on hand, maybe she took them voluntarily. Or maybe someone knew she had them and decided to play chemistry set. Back at the brownstone, I dumped everything onto Wolf's desk: names, times, doses, and attitude. He listened, motionless, eyes half closed like a man sunbathing in logic. Elia, he repeated softly. A name, an embroidery, and a whisper before death. I think someone planted that bookmark to send a message, I said. Yes, Wolf murmured. The question is, to whom? When Nero Wolf tells you to pursue the thread, he doesn't mean metaphorically. The man treats language like a battlefield, every word a bayonet. And in this case, the thread was lace. Literal, antique lace. With a name stitched into it like a ghost whispering across fabric, Elia. Wolf, lounging under the shadow of his globe of beer, gave his instructions with the regal detachment of a man who wouldn't be caught dead within sniffing distance of a second-hand shawl. Laywork that detailed is neither spontaneous nor modern, he said. Find the hands that made it. Which meant it was back to the city for me this time, with lace on the mind and a stack of business cards from specialty antique dealers Wolf had dictated while Fritz plated a poached egg with the reverence of a cathedral priest. My third stop was the Charm. Eloise and Whittier Fine Textiles, an old lady-sounding shop with heavy velvet curtains and a door chime that jingled like it had arthritis. Inside, the air smelled of lavender, old brass, and opinions. A tall woman in her 60s, tight bun and sharper gaze, introduced herself as Cynthia Whittier. She had a tape measure slung around her neck like a noose and lips that had been pursed since 1987. I showed her the photo Wolf had printed from the lace bookmark, high resolution, magnified detail. She adjusted her glasses and leaned in. That's real, she said finally. Belgian bobbin lace. Not a style you find at Hobby Lobby. Handmade? Absolutely. That stitchwork is custom, see this? The V in Elia is cross-knotted. That's a signature style. Whose? She hesitated. There's a woman. Used to bring pieces in for consignment. She never gave her full name. Just Elia. Some years ago. I blinked. She signed her lace with her own name? Apparently thought it was clever. She only made a handful, mostly bookmarks and mourning trims. Always antique patterns. She was dramatic. You still have her contact? Whittier shook her head. She vanished 3 years ago. No calls. No lace. Just stopped coming. I left with the name circled and underlined in my notes again. Elia. No last name, no address, just a whisper in needlepoint. Back at the brownstone, Wolf was more annoyed than interested. She vanished, he growled. What is this, operetta? She used to sign her lace, I said, which means either she planted it or someone wanted it to look like she did. He grunted, then motioned for the envelope. I handed him the lace, still sealed, untouched. Wolf examined it like it had personally insulted his waistline. Someone wanted this noticed, he murmured. Not hidden. Saturday, so they wanted Miss Larch to find it. Yes. And whoever Elia is, they either vanished or they've been made to vanish. That was when the phone rang. I answered it, still watching Wolf's eyes trace the lace edges. Goodwin speaking. It was Miss Larch. Mr. Goodwin, she said, her voice tight and clipped. Ray, the cashier girl, didn't show up for her shift this morning. Okay. She also didn't answer her phone. I called her apartment. Her roommate said she left last night saying she was going to tell someone everything. She hasn't come back. I straightened. Wolf, watching me, narrowed his eyes. What? Witness just vanished, I said. The one who said nothing was weird. Miss Larch wasn't done. There's more, she said. I found something in the lost and found box behind the front desk. What? A receipt. For embroidery thread. Dated 3 days before Martha's death. It's signed. Elia. I didn't even have time to write it down. Wolf stood. That's right, stood. Archie, he said. Yes. Bring the girl's roommate here. And the receipt. And I want a copy of every registered transaction from that shop for the last 2 weeks. And what'll you be doing? He looked down at the lace again. Connecting threads. By the time I got Ray's roommate to the brownstone, somewhere between coaxing and light manipulation, Wolf was in full obstruction mode. His lips were tight, his hands clasped on his belly like a lawyer withholding evidence, and his expression was 1 part brooding monk and 2 parts thundercloud. The cause of this foul atmospheric shift was none other than Inspector Kramer, who had dropped by unannounced an hour earlier while I was out. Apparently, our esteemed friend from homicide had opinions. Wolf does not respond well to opinions. When I walked through the door, Wolf waved one pudgy hand like a dismissive monarch. Send her away. I blinked. Excuse me. The girl. I will not speak to anyone. This investigation is suspended. You want to run that by me again? He turned toward the window like it owed him an apology. Kramer has accused me of interfering in a police matter without cause or license. Until he retracts the insult, this case is over. Ah, there it was. The Wolf objection. Every case gets one, sometimes 2 if we're blessed. This one came in the form of wounded pride, bruised vanity, and a simmering dislike for any badge with an attitude. Usually, it passed after a sulk, a beer, or the reappearance of a juicy contradiction. I sighed. You're going to let a murderer walk because Kramer was rude? He was not rude. He was uncivil, inaccurate, and profoundly lacking in judgment. That is not merely rude, it is unacceptable. Before I could argue, Fritz appeared at the office door, holding a folded slip of paper. A call just came for Mr. Goodwin. A message. I took it and opened the note. My gut did a backflip. Found something. Meet me. Riverside Bridge. 7:30. Come alone. Ray. Wolf watched my face change, then reached for the note. I handed it to him. His expression didn't soften, but his brain clicked into gear like a lock sliding open. She's alive. Apparently. She did not send this through the police. Nope. She intends to give you information. That's what it says. He dropped the note onto his desk like it was too obvious. Then go, he said. But carry your gun. That told me something. When Wolf tells me to carry my gun, it means he doesn't believe we're playing Clue anymore. I left the girl in the front room with Fritz, who promised tea and kept her talking. She was nervous, said Ray had been acting off for days, checking over her shoulder, muttering about being part of something too big. Not exactly comforting words from a bookstore cashier. By 7:20, I was in place at Riverside Bridge, a trench coat over my shoulder holster, eyes sharp. The area was quiet, wind off the water cutting through my suit. The bridge cast long shadows under the glow of yellow streetlights. At 7:35, Ray didn't show. At 7:40, I found her scarf, red wool, snagged on a bolt near the south rail, and smeared with something brownish-black. Blood? Maybe, maybe not. But Wolf wouldn't like it. When I returned home and placed the scarf gently on his desk, he didn't say a word for nearly a minute. Then, I am reinstituting our involvement in the matter. No kidding. I will speak to Inspector Kramer. I blinked. I thought you weren't speaking to him until he brought you truffles and an apology. That was before your evening walk turned into a preview of Othello. He picked up the scarf, examined the smear, and then opened his desk drawer with the solemnity of a general calling up reserves. Find Miss Larch, he said. Ask her about embroidery suppliers, particularly those that stock Belgian bobbin thread. Then contact Mr. Ames and invite him here tomorrow evening. To meet with you? To meet with everyone. I paused. Everyone. His eyes glinted. I am calling a gathering. That meant the pieces had begun to click, maybe not into the full picture yet, but into something close enough to draw blood. There's a special kind of silence in Wolf's office when the truth is tiptoeing around, just out of sight. He was leaning back in his chair, fingertips pressed together like he was hearing a symphony only he could conduct, while I relayed the update from Miss Larch. She gave me the name of the thread supplier, I said. A place on East 49th. They keep Belgian lace stock. Niche stuff. They confirmed that someone using the name Elia Morton bought a full reel last week. Wolf opened his eyes slowly. Morton. That name ring a bell? Only faintly. Proceed. The store has a record of 3 prior purchases over the past 4 months. Same name. Same signature. Paid in cash. Wolf didn't speak. He just reached for his beer. That meant his mind was circling something. Before I could press him, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, and a minute later Miss Larch stepped into the office, her posture stiff, her hands wrapped tightly around a manila envelope like it was radioactive. I found something, she said. Wolf gestured toward the red chair. Sit. And describe. She did both. We were going through the returns bin in the back room, reshelving old donations. I found this tucked into the inside cover of a copy of The Mill on the Floss. It was from Martha's private stock, her annotated copy. She passed the envelope across Wolf's desk. He opened it, withdrew a folded sheet of heavy paper, and adjusted his spectacles. A will, he muttered. A handwritten will. I leaned forward. Let me guess, it names someone unexpected. Miss Larch nodded. Yes, it leaves everything, not just her savings, but the ownership of the bookshop, to a woman named Elia Morton. Boom. That was the sound of another shoe dropping. Wolf's mouth pulled to one side, a testament without witnesses. She was planning to have it formalized, Miss Larch added. I believe she was keeping it hidden until she could have it notarized. Wolf folded the paper again, sliding it back into the envelope. You presume she feared family objections. Her cousin, Gregory Ames, was pressuring her. He wanted her to sell the shop. And instead, she named the lace maker? I think Elia was more than that. Wolf arched a brow. Do tell. Miss Larch hesitated, then said, they were close. I believe, intimately. Quietly. I whistled. That would explain the tension in the tea corner. And the disappearance, Wolf added. Miss Larch stood. I thought you should see it before the police find it and label it motive. Wolf nodded. Wise. This is not a motive. It is a message. And perhaps. He paused, his gaze flicking to me. Perhaps a trap. When Miss Larch left, Wolf stood again. That's twice in 2 days. A clear sign we were approaching combustion. She did not hide that document from her enemies, he said. She hid it from her beneficiary. You think Elia never saw it? I think, Wolf said, walking to the window, that Elia Morton never existed. I gave him a long look. We've got purchases, lace work, and embroidery signature. All anonymous. No confirmed sightings. No address. No phone number. No tax records. Only a name stitched by hand. I exhaled. So who left the will? I believe Martha Bromley did. But she may have intended it to be found, not to name an heir, but to point a finger. A forged will. Not forged, Wolf said. Planted. Perhaps by Martha herself. Or perhaps by the killer. In either case, it is bait. I tapped my pen on the desk. Then someone's going to bite. Wolf turned back from the window, face stern. They already have. Someone tried to lure you to a bridge with a note signed by Ray. And now this will appears, designed to make us chase a ghost. He lowered himself back into his chair, slowly, deliberately. The question, he said softly, is who benefits if we follow that ghost and miss the real killer? I nodded. You want me to dig deeper into Ames? Yes. Quietly. His finances, his holdings, his connections to the shop. And Ray? Wolf's eyes flicked to the red scarf, still folded neatly beside his blotter. If she's alive, she's in hiding. If she's not, we are running out of time. The real trouble with Gregory Ames was that he didn't blink when he lied. I was in the lounge of the New Savoy Club, a private affair where the scotch was old and the members older. Ames had agreed to meet me briefly, and only as a courtesy, which told me he thought he still held the upper hand. He wore a navy overcoat, a cashmere scarf, and the kind of half-smile you usually see in oil portraits of men who paid for everything and earned nothing. We'd barely gotten through the fake pleasantries when I hit him with it. There's a new development, I said casually. A handwritten will. Leaves everything, shop, money, copyrights, to someone named Elia Morton. Ames froze for a full second, then gave a slow blink and half-smile. Really? How convenient. Convenient. For whoever this Elia is, he said. If she exists. She does. Name's been showing up at lace suppliers. Your cousin knew her. I doubt that, he said. There it was. Wolf would have caught it instantly. I did too, but I played dumb. You doubt she knew Elia? I doubt she knew anyone she hadn't known for decades. Martha was, how do I say this politely, a creature of habit. That was his mistake. Subtle, but fatal. I ended the meeting shortly after. I knew I had what Wolf needed. Back at the brownstone, Wolf was seated in his chair with his latest bottle of Lowenbrow and a look of mild expectation, like a stage director waiting for the lead actor to remember his lines. I tossed my notes on the desk. He said Martha didn't know anyone knew, that her circle hadn't changed in decades. Yes, Wolf said. I suspected he would. You were right. I was listening, Archie. Wolf took a long sip of beer, then placed the bottle carefully on the coaster. Mr. Ames told us early on that Martha had hinted at changing her will. I nodded. Right. Said it might anger someone in the family. Indeed. So how, Wolf asked, folding his hands, could she hint at changing her will to name someone, if she never spoke of knowing anyone knew? I blinked, then grinned. Boom. Precisely, Wolf said. Ames cannot have it both ways. Either she was, as he claims, a creature of habit, unchanging, solitary, or she was preparing to name an unknown woman in her will. And he was the one who told us both versions. Because he thought they served different purposes, Wolf said, leaning forward slightly. First, to discredit the idea of Elia being real. Second, to feign insider knowledge of Martha's intentions, as though he had her trust. But the contradiction collapses under scrutiny. I let that marinate. So he lied. Yes. About what he knew, when he knew it, and how he knew it. I paced a bit. Still not proof. No, Wolf agreed. But motive begins to crystallize. If Elia is real and was close to Martha, then the new will endangers Gregory's inheritance. If Elia is not real, then someone planted her as a false heir, either to misdirect or to destroy Gregory. I paused. You think he knew about the new will? I believe he knew enough. Perhaps he discovered a draft. Perhaps he overheard something. Either way, he acted. I shook my head. And Ray? She may have seen something she didn't understand, Wolf said. Or understood too well. Either way, she became inconvenient. He pushed his empty beer bottle aside. We are near the center, Archie. One more thread, and the whole cloth will unravel. I raised an eyebrow. And that thread is. He tapped the envelope containing the will. Handwriting, he said. We need confirmation it's Martha's. If it is, the will is genuine. If not, then someone forged it. Yes, either to direct blame toward Elia or to conceal their own hand. I moved to the door. Where to? Wolf asked. To get that handwriting sample. I'll visit Miss Larch again. If Martha made marginal notes in her books, we've got our comparison. Wolf nodded. Take care, Archie. We are no longer chasing a mystery. We are chasing a murderer who writes fiction. The next morning started with the rarest of events, a phone call from Inspector Kramer that Wolf actually answered himself. I was halfway through my toast in the kitchen when I heard Wolf growl, yes, like he'd been interrupted mid-theory instead of mid-egg. He hung up 5 minutes later with the same expression he reserves for poorly ripened avocados. Well? I asked, stepping into the office with coffee in one hand and suspicion in the other. Wolf leaned back, eyes half-lidded. They've arrested Tommy Brisk. I blinked. The kid who trembled making change? Yes, Wolf said. Kramer claims they've traced sedative residue to the teapot used that afternoon. Tommy prepared it. Kramer thinks Tommy spiked it? Indeed. Based on circumstantial timelines and Tommy's prior access. I set my mug down. Tommy wouldn't kill a moth with bad intentions, let alone his employer. Wolf grunted. Kramer's need for resolution is stronger than his sense of balance. That wasn't news. But still, even I had to admit, sedatives in the tea matched Martha's cause of death. Tommy had access. That made for a convincing puzzle until Wolf started pulling at the corners. Let us reconstruct, Wolf said. Martha Bromley enters the bookshop shortly before noon. She browses, then takes her usual table. Tommy prepares tea. He raised a hand and ticked off points. 1. The tea is served publicly. Witnesses confirm Tommy poured it, then returned to the counter. Check. 2. Martha speaks to no one else after that. No one approaches. Within 10 minutes, she slumps. No scream. No flail. Just quiet collapse. I nodded. Fainted, everyone thought. Now, Wolf said, leaning forward, imagine you are Tommy Brisk. Barely 20, nervous as a house cat. Would you poison a woman in broad daylight, in front of your employer, with a method that guarantees your fingerprints on the pot? Not unless you wanted a direct route to prison. Precisely. If the poison were in the teapot, Wolf continued, then the killer was either criminally stupid, or he paused, letting the thought settle. Or they knew the teapot would be the focus. I frowned. A setup. A beautifully clumsy one, Wolf said. Because there's a detail no one noticed. He held up a small cloth, a tea towel, checked blue and white. Miss Larch sent this with the lace bookmark. It was used to dry the pot after rinsing. It was, she said, part of their routine closing procedure. Yet, it was soaked through, and not with water. I raised an eyebrow. With what? Wolf sniffed once, then handed it over. I caught the faintest trace, like floral alcohol, almost medicinal. Lavender liqueur, Wolf said. Fritz confirmed it. So, he said, someone rinsed the teapot after the poisoning. Sloppily. Then dried it and overcompensated. Which means the killer wanted it to look like Tommy hadn't been careful. A double bluff. I whistled. So the evidence was planted to look like amateur hour. Yes, But the choice of poison matters. Wolf stood and moved toward his bookshelf, not for a novel, but for toxins and ingestibles, a forensic companion which he kept filed between Dumas and Darwin. The compound found in Martha's system was a rare variant of Valifen, a sedative no longer manufactured domestically. Only specialty apothecaries carry it. Let me guess. Levington Pharmacy? Wolf gave the ghost of a smile. Indeed. You recall who else had a prescription there? I felt it click. Martha herself. Low dosage. Yes, but he added, there is no evidence she filled a prescription within the last 6 months. I paced the room. So someone found her pills or got a supply somewhere else. Slipped it into her cup, or something else. No, Wolf said, voice tightening. Not her cup. He pointed to the lace bookmark. She died while reading. The tea was a distraction. The poison was on the lace. I stared at him. The lace killed her? Wolf nodded once. Steeped in a Valifen solution. Absorbed through skin, especially if handled for an extended period. And Miss Larch said she was fiddling with it, rubbing it between her fingers. My blood ran a little colder. So, all this noise about tea was just a smokescreen. Exactly. And Kramer, Wolf added dryly, has arrested a boy for making bad tea while the killer stitched the murder into literature. I picked up the phone, calling him. No, I said. Not yet. I glanced at Wolf. We're calling everyone. He nodded once. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., Archie. Invite them all, Gregory Ames. Miss Larch. Ray, if she resurfaces. The roommate. Whittier, the lace dealer. Even the shop boy, if Kramer permits it. I want the full cast in this room. I grinned. You going to set the stage? I already have, Wolf said. Tomorrow, we close the curtain. There's something theatrical about Nero Wolf's office when it's full of suspects. The heavy air, the carefully chosen chairs, the flicker of light off the globe. Even Fritz's orchids seem to lean in closer. But the real drama isn't in the setting. It's in the silence before Wolf speaks. At precisely 6 o'clock, everyone had arrived. Wolf never starts a minute before or after. Timing, like murder, is an art to him. In attendance. Gregory Ames, smug and polished, seated stiffly near the fireplace. Miss Larch, lips pursed, a bundle of nerves tied in a librarian's cardigan. Cynthia Whittier, the lace dealer, who examined the woodwork like it might be worth appraising. Tommy Brisk, released an hour earlier after Wolf's quiet suggestion to Kramer hit its target. He looked like someone halfway between grateful and broken. And last, like a curtain-drop surprise, Ray Morgan returned from wherever she'd vanished, her scarf back around her neck, her gaze clearer than it had been in days. Wolf didn't stand. He never does. He just looked over the group with his usual disdain for the necessity of their presence. You are here because Martha Bromley was murdered, he said. And someone in this room is responsible. That, as expected, got reactions. Ames shifted, Larch's hands tightened. Ray swallowed, and Whittier raised one skeptical eyebrow, as if the whole thing was a committee error. I will not waste time with performances, Wolf went on. But I will offer each of you a question. If you lie, I shall know. If you withhold, I shall press. He gestured toward Miss Larch. You first. Why did you fail to report the presence of the envelope in the mill on the floss when it first appeared in your donation box? She blinked. I didn't open the book. I didn't know the will was inside. Yet you catalog every book yourself, do you not? Well, yes. And this copy was marked in Martha's handwriting, with underlines and marginal notes, including the very page the envelope was tucked into. You expect us to believe you missed it entirely. She hesitated. I panicked. When I saw her name, I thought it might be a suicide note. I didn't want to believe someone hurt her. Wolf made a dismissive sound and moved on. Mr. Ames. Yes, Ames replied, smile tight. You claimed your cousin had mentioned changing her will. Yet you also told me she didn't know anyone outside her old social circle. That's correct. Then to whom would she leave her estate? He paused, just a beat too long. I assumed she meant me. Wolf grunted. Of course you did. He turned slightly toward Ray. Miss Morgan. Ray sat up. Yes. Where did you go? I hid in my friend's apartment in Queens. I didn't want to be next. Next. She looked down. I saw the bookmark. I knew Elia was real. I was with Martha when she made that piece. I helped her select the thread. She told me she wanted to leave everything to someone who wouldn't exploit it. I think someone found out. Wolf nodded once, then shifted to Cynthia Whittier. Madam, do you recognize the stitchwork? She straightened in her chair. Of course. That is Elia's hand. She sold through us 5 years ago. And what did Elia look like? Slender, pale, sharp cheekbones. Always wore gloves. Had a scar on her right wrist. Silence. Ray's head snapped toward her. That's not Elia. Everyone turned. Wolf's brows arched like a conductor about to cue his finale. What did you say, Miss Morgan? I said, that's not Elia. The real Elia was someone else. No scar. No gloves. Brown skin. Long hair. She was from Haiti. She told me. Whittier stiffened. That's ridiculous. I knew. Wolf held up a hand. It's not ridiculous, he said calmly. It's the first truth spoken tonight. Gasps were unnecessary. The room did something better. It went dead quiet. You, Wolf said, turning fully toward Whittier, fabricated an identity for a seller whose work you wanted control over. You took her name. Her lace. And when you realized the real Elia was gaining influence through Miss Bromley, you acted. Whittier's lips parted. I didn't. You did. Wolf cut in. You rinsed the teapot. You planted the false trail. You forged the scar into your recollection because you needed a persona. And when Martha made her intentions clear, you delivered the lace, soaked in Valifen, to send her a message. You didn't know she'd die so quickly. Whittier rose suddenly. This is absurd. It is murder, Wolf snapped, and poorly done at that. Kramer, standing at the rear like a bulldog in wait, stepped forward. That's enough. Wolf gestured toward the lace bookmark on his desk. Test it. The compound is still present. You'll find glove fibers on the embroidery, and Miss Whittier's glove size is 7. The thread purchase traced to her assistant, paid in cash. And the signature? Forged by someone familiar with Elia's cursive, but not her language. The original Elia wrote in Creole French. This one did not. Whittier sank into her seat, stone-faced. I caught the moment Ames slumped. Miss Larch was sobbing quietly. Ray was staring at the lace like it still breathed. Wolf lifted his beer with one hand. This concludes the gathering. Once Cynthia Whittier sank back into her chair, like a puppet with its strings cut, Wolf adjusted the crease of his vest, took one last sip of beer, and leaned forward with the grace of a judge preparing to sentence from the bench. This crime, he began, was never about money. Not in the traditional sense. The room had gone dead silent. Even Kramer, who'd taken up a position behind Ray's chair, said nothing. It was about control. Control of reputation, of legacy, and of lace. He let the sentence settle like steam from a kettle. Miss Bromley's reputation in the niche world of literary craft was considerable. Her work was not merely decorative, it was considered archival, even artistic. But it was her collaborations with Elia Morton that drew attention beyond her circle, attention Miss Whittier could not tolerate. He turned a glance toward Whittier, who was pale but no longer protesting. Elia Morton was the real artist, Wolf continued. Unpolished, unseen, but extraordinary. You saw it, Miss Whittier. You knew that if Elia gained recognition through Martha's patronage, your own influence in the lace world, your sales, your exclusivity, would dissolve. You had cultivated a persona. You even appropriated her name. I added, it explains why the stitch signature on the poisoned bookmark doesn't match the early pieces. 2 different hands. Wolf nodded. Yes, When you learned Martha was drafting a new will to make Elia heir to her estate, and, by extension, her name, you panicked. You stole one of Elia's bookmarks from the shop's private collection, soaked it in a liquid compound of Valifen, and planted it the day before the murder. Ray leaned forward. But how could she know Martha would pick that bookmark? She didn't, Wolf said. She planted it within reach on the corner table Martha preferred. Subtle suggestion. And she ensured it was the only new lace added that day. He turned to Kramer. You asked earlier why there was no clear delivery record for the bookmark. It's because Miss Whittier smuggled it in herself, disguised as a customer, wearing gloves to avoid fingerprints. Kramer let out a slow breath. And the tea? A red herring, Wolf said. Intended to implicate the staff. But the poison wasn't ingested, it was absorbed. He glanced at Miss Larch, then back at Whittier. And the forged will? That, too, was your doing. A clever way to frame Elia if things turn sour. Whittier finally spoke. Her voice was brittle. You can't prove that. Wolf shrugged. Perhaps not in court. But I believe the handwriting analysis will match your assistant, not Miss Bromley. And Archie has already arranged a search warrant for your studio. I suspect it contains a copy of Elia's early letters, used as your model. Kramer spoke then, his voice flat. You forged a will, killed a woman with lace, and let an innocent boy rot in a cell. I didn't think she'd die, Whittier muttered. It was meant to make her ill. Scare her into silence. That's all. Wolf scoffed. Poison is rarely subtle. You played with toxins the way you play with fabric. But humans unravel faster. Tommy Brisk let out a breath he'd been holding for days. Ray stood slowly, eyes glassy but burning. Wolf reached for his beer again. Inspector, I believe you have all the tools you require. Kramer nodded stiffly. Yeah, I do. He cuffed Whittier with the grace of someone who'd waited too long for the truth. She didn't fight it. As the door closed behind them, silence reclaimed the room. Aftermath. Wolf leaned back in his chair, eyes shut, content as a man who'd trimmed the final branch from a tangled tree. Ray lingered. What'll happen to the shop? That, Wolf said, depends on what you do with the legacy. She nodded. I think I'll rebuild it. In Elia's name. For real this time. He raised his glass. Then you've earned Martha's trust a second time. As she left, I turned to Wolf. You do know you solved a murder using lace, fear, and a conversation about handwriting. Phwee, he muttered. All murder is stitched from the same fabric. One must simply know where the thread begins. I grinned. That's poetic. He scowled. It's Tuesday. Be quiet. Fritz is roasting duck. By Wednesday, the newspapers had started calling it the lace murder. That's what happens when a woman gets bumped off in a bookstore with a decorative object. If Martha had been strangled with a shoelace, it'd be the Oxford case. Add a little embroidery and you get headlines. Wolf, as expected, didn't read the coverage. He'd already declared the matter a closed loop of mediocrity stitched to arrogance. His exact words, after dinner, over a second bottle of Lowenbrow. Fritz had roasted the duck to perfection, by the way. Kramer came by the next day, not for a fight, for once, but to return the lace bookmark in an evidence envelope. Your fingerprints weren't on it, so I figure you'll want it for your little museum, he said, dropping it onto Wolf's desk like it was toxic. Wolf didn't look up. Phwee. Kramer left with a grunt. That's about as warm as they get. As for the rest of the cast, Tommy Brisk got a quiet settlement from the city, something hush-hush, and just enough to keep him behind a counter but out of a courtroom. He took the money and moved to Connecticut, where he's apparently helping open a vintage tea room with his aunt. The irony was lost on no one. Ray Morgan stayed in the city. She took over what remained of the bookmark and started something new, the Margin Press, a little lace and literature collective where young artists work with rare books and original crafts. Wolf received a limited edition embroidered folio of leaves of grass, along with a handwritten note thanking him for saving what mattered. He didn't respond. but the book now lives behind glass in the West Wall Orchid Room. That's Wolf's version of a standing ovation. Gregory Ames quietly withdrew from his foundation's board, for health reasons. Rumor has it he tried to buy a vineyard in Oregon, but was rejected when the sellers found his name in the Times. If there's anything more tragic than being a social parasite, it's being a publicly exposed one. And Cynthia Whittier? She's awaiting trial. Her defense hinges on intent to harm not being equal to intent to kill. Wolf's prediction, second-degree conviction, with a side order of disgrace. That's legalese for no lace shops in her future. That brings us back to the brownstone. Wolf didn't take another case for 2 weeks. He claimed he was purging his mind with Gerda and osmanthus tea. More likely, he was admiring the silk blossoms on his new Vanda coerulean hybrid. I asked him once, half seriously, if solving a murder through a piece of embroidered lace had changed his view on domestic crafts. He gave me a look like I'd asked whether pigs could waltz. "Archie," he said, "thread is thread. It either holds or it unravels." Which, come to think of it, was about as close to poetry as he gets.